Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the team Calcutta Comparatists 1919, I take this privilege to warmly welcome you to the 73rd lecture of our lecture series. Calcutta Comparatists 1919 is an independent forum for research scholars of humanities and social sciences. It carries the legacy of academic study of Indian languages and literatures envisioned by Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee and introduced in 1919 at the University of Calcutta. Later in 2005, a new department called Comparative Indian Languages and Literatures was established, which still continues to carry research in Indian languages. Calcutta Comparatives 1919 took this inspiration from the history, and it is a platform for sharing research interests and ideas. We are organizing online lectures on various interdisciplinary topics to be delivered by academicians and distinguished research scholars of different fields. Your remarkable skills will be a great addition to our team. We look forward to a mutually beneficial relationship with you. Thank you for joining us today. Now, I would like to request our host Aratrika Ganguly to introduce our speaker. Aratrika.
Thank you, Shupana. Thank you for the introduction. A very good evening to all of you and a very good morning to Professor Mehta. Now I will introduce our speaker for the day, Professor Purnima Mehta Bhatt. She is a professor of history, anthropology, and interdisciplinary studies, Emerita, Wood College, USA. Ma'am was awarded her PhD in African history from Harvard University, and she did her postgraduate work at Harvard University. Dr. Purnima Mehta Bhatt's current research interests focus on the historical and contemporary roles of women in Asia and Africa, global perspectives on women power and politics, women's leadership in peace movements, the impact of globalization on women, and more recently, the African presence in India. She is also the author of numerous peer-reviewed papers and 4 books. Her book entitled Her Space, Her Story Exploring the Stepwells of Gujarat was published by Zuban in 2014, and today her talk will be based on this very particular book. Her most recent publication is a chapter in a book titled Women's Leadership in Chaotic Environment that was published by Springer in 2016. Also, one of her most recent publications is a book titled The African Diaspora in India, Assimilation, Cultural Change and Survivors that was published from Routledge in 2017. Ma'am has lectured extensively in India, the UK, the USA, Europe, Mexico, Philippines, South Korea, and many other Southeast Asian countries. She is the recipient of many fellowships and honors, including the Excellence in Teaching Award. She has presented numerous papers at national and international conferences. Thank you, Professor Purnima Mehta Bhatt, for joining us today. Ma'am, this virtual floor is all yours. You may please begin your lecture now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I very much appreciate being invited to join you. It's a wonderful opportunity to be able to share some of my work with my students and with all of you. And I have always felt that I'm inspired by being with younger scholars, and I'm learning from them as much as I hope they learn from me. Um,
Thank you,
uh,
ma'am.
Aratrika has already said that I will be talking about one of my books. It's entitled Her Space, Her Story. My book examines and documents the role women played in the building and patronage of and as inspiration for the numerous stepped wells of Gujarat from the 7th century to the 19th century. What it does is provide a historical analysis and a visual documentation of the stepwells, thereby contributing to a better understanding of the relationship between women, water, architecture, and religion. My book examines the stepwells primarily as a distinct space for women. In my book, I have focused primarily on what I call the woman factor in the stepwells of Gujarat. Now, more often than not, women appear as silent spectators in history not as active participants. Recent scholarship points to an urgent need to call into question why women's lives, their contributions, have been so vastly neglected. There is, I believe, a compelling urgency to correct the historical record to more accurately reflect women's achievements and their perspectives, to hear their voices, which have remained silent for so many centuries. I first encountered Stepwells more than half a century ago when, on a summer vacation, I visited my grandmother in Ahmedabad. She arranged for me to join a day-long sightseeing trip to tour the historical sites and the architectural monuments in and around Ahmedabad. It was during the course of that trip that I first visited the stepwell of Adalaj, and I will show you a little bit of that later on, and was absolutely struck by its unique grandeur and artistic beauty. Many decades later, I learned that the stepwells, which are a familiar feature of the landscape of Gujarat, once numbered in the thousands. In the dry, arid, and parched land where water is scarce and rains are scanty, these wells provided life-giving water to both humans and animals, and they enabled the land to become fertile. What was for me even more intriguing was that of the several hundred stepwells that have been excavated, around 1/4, that is 25% of them, were actually built by women. Queens, women of the royalty, wives of rich merchants, ordinary women, and if you can believe it, even courtesans and prostitutes or servant girls who hope to gain religious merit and possibly immortality through the gift of water. Not only did women commission many of the stepwells as patrons and donors, they also frequently served as inspiration. Stepwells were built to honor and were named after a virtuous wife or a benevolent mother, a local goddess, or a beloved mistress. As new research is undertaken with a greater sensitivity to gender issues, it is exciting to envision that more women will emerge as patrons of art and architecture. The art of the stepwells honors and celebrates the feminine principle, the creative force in the universe. The goddess, in her manifested form, is visible everywhere in the stepwells, occupying not a servile position, but rather a place of preeminence. I asked myself, were these wells then an indication of women's growing power and wealth in society? Their striving to place themselves in history's gaze and thereby challenge the stereotypes of their passivity. Women gathered at these stepwells to obtain water, but also to appeal to the local deities for health, happiness, and children. They performed rituals to ensure their own fertility, to ask the goddess for the gift of sons, to ask her to intercede on their behalf so that the milk would flow from their breast, to nurture their newborn. These age-old rituals in and around the stepwells continue even today. The stepwells became a favorite subject in folklore. Every step of these stepwells yields tales of love and betrayal, of courage and sacrifice. And I have attempted in my book to identify and translate some of these songs that tell us about the inner lives of women whose voices still echo in these now crumbling and often dilapidated structures. These stepwells are unique structures because they were not merely utilitarian buildings, they served a dual function, providing water, but also as a site for ritual and propitiation of the local deities. In other words, they are linking three worlds. The subterranean, remember that stepwells are under the ground, the earthly, which is the terrestrial, and the heavenly, which is the celestial. I believe that there is much we can learn by giving a voice to the countless women forgotten and neglected by history. In doing so, we will have succeeded in some measure in making the invisible visible. And this is both the invisible water, which becomes visible, and also, of course, the invisible society, women in a gendered society. I'd like to begin, before I show some of the images, I'd like to begin talking a little bit about the sanctity and significance of water in India. And you're probably quite familiar with that. It goes without saying that water is essential for survival. From the very early beginnings of human culture, it has played a vital role in the birth and flowering of civilizations. In a dry and arid landscape like that of Gujarat, water can make the difference between life and death. So, as early as the 7th century of the Common Era, inhabitants of this region developed strategies for storing and preserving the water from the annual monsoons by digging deep into the ground to utilize the underground sources of water. They built stepwells leading to the water, which became the first stepwells. Let me see if I can start off with the images as we go along. Okay. Are you able to let me. Are you able to see the?
Yes, ma'am, it is visible.
Okay. So I'm going to begin with the first one. And here I begin my lectures, or I think in my book, this is a picture which brings together the two subjects that are important to me, the women. And here's a very beautiful woman and a stepwell in the background. Aritrika, are you able to see the screen properly?
Yes, ma'am, it is visible.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. It's visible.
Oh, it is visible. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So here's a quick map of India. And of course, you can see on the western side, Gujarat and Rajasthan. And these are the two areas where you see mostly you find the stepwells. This is not a very good photograph, but it shows you Gujarat and Rajasthan. And the little black dots that you see, particularly under Gujarat, are all the various stepwells that have been actually excavated and studied by the scholars in the last few years. This is a good image to show you women going off to fetch water. In this case, to the well. And I will talk a little bit about the differences between a well and a stepwell in a few minutes. But it's a wonderful image to show you the women with their pitchers of water, the water pots, going off or traveling to and from the stepwells. Another picture, and I want to just look carefully at this image here, and you see that there are about 5 women with their pots. Now, women took great pride in their shining and glistening pots, which they scrubbed till they shone like the golden rays of the sun. And so, one of the poems in my book is a translation of a poem in Gujarati where a young girl expresses her longing, her great desire, and her pining for a beautiful pot. And she says, and I'm translating, of course, from Gujarati into English, I am not going to draw water from a copper pot. She's telling her mother as she's about to go to fetch water, I'm not going to draw water from a copper pot. Oh, mother, I yearn for a golden one. So you see the woman in the middle has already attained her desire for a golden pot. Okay, as I mentioned to you, and this is a picture of one of the stepwells, that stepwells began to be built, constructed around the 6th century. The region of Gujarat was a vital link in the trade between the north and the south. Gujarat was located at the crossroads of trade routes. From times immemorial, caravans laden with cotton goods, textiles, silk, indigo dye, pearls, carpets, and other goods traveled through this region carrying precious cargo bound for distant lands. Merchants known as Vanjaras in Gujarat traveled long distances with their merchandise and trade goods loaded on their bullock carts and their camels. These traders often traveled at night, guided by the stars, and tried to avoid the fierce midday sun, taking rest for several hours in the daytime. The wells provided not just water for them and their animals, but also a dark, cool place where they could avoid the scorching sun and rejuvenate themselves surrounded by the presence of gods and goddesses and various deities. So here you are, it's like you are actually, this is at Adalaj outside of Ahmedabad, and you see the women, you see very beautiful pillars decorated. It's a 7-storied stepwell, and the women are going down to the water. And so you get an idea of the depth here. Women, pilgrims, itinerant traders, troops on the march, and royal hunting parties use these stepwells for water and rest. So you can see the platforms here and places where they could have rested. The landing platforms and ornamental galleries, which I'll show you in a minute, were decorated with figurative carvings of deities, of animals and birds, plant motifs, which served as an escape and a distraction from the monotonous journeys that traders had to carry out. So let me go back once, and this stepwell, and we'll see some close-ups of it, is probably one of the most spectacular, one of the grandest, and artistically one of the most beautiful in Gujarat. It's called Rani Ni Vav, and that really means the Queen Stepwell because it was commissioned by a queen in 1067 AD. So it's about 1,000 years old. It's 7-storied, multi-storied stepwell with wonderful embellishments and ornamentation and carvings all around the walls, and I will show you that. The stepwell in Gujarat is referred to, in Sanskrit, it is referred to as Vapi or Vapika, while in Gujarati language it is called a vow or a bauli. It is generally a rectangular or an octagonal structure containing a flight of steps, and you saw those steps leading down to the water. In contrast to the wells, ordinary wells, the step wells did not always require a rope or any other device to fetch water. These step wells, in contrast to ordinary wells, were also different because they had they were elaborate structures, often multi-storied as the one you see. They differed in that they contain elaborate decoration and embellishments on the walls, which were profusely decorated with designs of goddesses, of flowers, vines, animals, leaves, and animals. You are seeing here one of the walls from the Rani Ki Vav, the Queen Stepwell in Patan, in the place that is known as Patan. And if you just sort of look at it, you see that the entire wall is covered by beautiful sculptural carvings. It is said that in Patan alone, in this one stepwell of Patan, built 1,000 years ago, there are more than 700 carvings or images embellishing the stepwells. The stepwells, thus, of Gujarat represent a unique form of water architecture, which is both functional, in other words, it is utilitarian in nature, as well as aesthetically stunningly beautiful. An examination of these stepwells constructed under the patronage of Hindu and Muslim dynasties reveals the unique attitude of religious tolerance and a spirit of assimilation rarely witnessed elsewhere. These stepwells successfully transcended religious differences and sectarian conflicts. History and legend, as I have mentioned, link many of these stepwells to women. So certainly we want to ask the intriguing question, why did women commission or patronize these different types of stepwells? What was the motivation for them to become patrons of art and architecture for nearly 1,000 years? Now, if we were to look at the ancient Vedic texts, such as the Agni Purana or the Padma Purana, we find many, many hymns suggesting that the gift of water was regarded in ancient India as a deeply pious act. It is stated in the Padma Puran that whoever builds water buildings will enjoy thousands of years of paradise. Agni Puran says that one attains all merits by the endowment of water and goes straight to heaven. My next section of my discussion is focused on women and space. Now, this is a bit important for me because, as I said, my book is entitled Her Space, Her Story. So I'm focusing in this section very briefly, sharing with you the whole idea of women and space. But before I do that, I want to suggest that through the patronage of stepwells, becoming donors or patrons of stepwell, women in Gujarat and Rajasthan were vying for immortality. They were searching and striving for a place in the pages of history. They want to, in other words, insert themselves into the pages of history. From the very earliest of times, virtually all societies, women have been relegated and subordinated and confined to the domestic sphere, whereas men's activities have linked them to the public sphere. So I'm contrasting the domestic sphere of the women versus the public realm of the men. Being confined and restricted to the home implied that women had fewer or no opportunities to move into the public realm, to establish cross-cutting networks of support, and to seek and exercise power. In other words, they were excluded from power. The Stepwells are therefore unique in a sense because they provided women a socially legitimated opportunity to move out of the domestic realm, albeit just for a few hours a day, and step out into the public domain. This enabled them to escape the oppression of their daily lives, the exploitation and restrictions that they experienced in a deeply patriarchal society. Thus, the stepwells, where women went to fetch water daily, afforded them a brief measure of freedom and autonomy. It allowed them to express their sorrows and frustrations, and perhaps seek solace and friendship and support from other women. It enabled women to express their romantic fantasies, and I'm sure they must have had many, to imagine the unimaginable, and to momentarily, just for a few moments, enjoy the freedom she had experienced in her childhood. Wells and stepwells provided women with a measure of social freedom and served as what I call a safety valve. In other words, when they are all pent up and frustrated with their lives, when they went to the stepwells and commiserated with other women, gained the support of other women, for those few moments, for those few hours, they felt like they were back in their childhood home, what we call in India the pier. It a time of spontaneous freedom and joy and no responsibilities. Thus, the stepwell served as a substitute for pier or her childhood home. It offered them space where they came to laugh and to cry, to share their joys and sorrows, and to while away an hour or two and enjoy leisure, something they rarely possessed in their daily lives. You have to think about how women, poor women, millions of women in poor countries absolutely have no leisure time. From morning to night, they are working in the farms or the fields, they are working inside the home, they do the cooking, they take care of the children, they take care of the elderly, and leisure is something that has been denied to women in all societies. I have tried to translate the folklore which emanates from these stepwells, and particularly the encounters that they had at the stepwells, which provide us a little bit of a glimpse into the lives, the inner lives of women in a gendered society, about which we know so little and which give us invaluable insights into the lived experiences of these women. Stepwells and wells served as the inspiration for countless songs and poems, which describe, as I said, the emotions and inner feelings of the young women who go to the wells to fetch water, as well as the chance encounters and the liaisons that result from such meeting. One such song goes, and this is a woman lamenting, and I translate from Gujarati. How can I go to fetch water? Oh, friend of mine, how can I go to fetch water? A stranger standing at the steps of the well made me bashful and lose all control. How can I go to fetch water, my dear friend? She's talking about the fantasy, romantic fantasy of someone she's fallen in love with at the foot of the stepwells. The women came to the stepwells, to fetch water for bathing, washing, and cooking. However, these places were also a site for the performance of rituals and religious rites. The rituals performed near the stepwells river very often centered around fertility and a woman's yearning for children, a common concern for all women. The emotion, however, was particularly intense in India, where fulfillment often came from becoming a mother of many sons, and childlessness was considered a curse. A popular song in the Kheralu region, which is one of the dry regions of Gujarat, focuses on this theme of the desire for children. So the woman says, I'm coming fast with the water pot filled with water. Oh, Ranna Day, please give me the one who would pull me by the skirt. Now, I don't know if you're familiar. Ranna Day is the wife of the sun, but she's also the protectoress of women in childbirth, for fertility. So the woman says, I'm coming fast with the water pot filled with water. Oh, Ranna Day, please, please give me the one who would pull me by the skirt. Oh, mother, the taunts of childlessness are unbearable. This above refrain is a very common one. When women are unable to bear children, they suffer the taunts and humiliation in society and appeal to the mother goddess to bless them with a child. No humiliation was greater for a woman than the curse of barrenness. So there are many beautiful songs on this theme. The frustrations and despair of the maiden, infatuated by love, madly in love, who goes out to the stepwell with the excuse or on the pretext of fetching water, is expressed in the following song. The rope is 40 arms length long, yet could not reach the water. While waiting for the beloved one, the day, after all, is about to end. So she goes to fetch water, but her rope doesn't reach the water level. While she drops the pot inside the well, she looks down into the well, but her thoughts are only of her beloved, of her lover. And she thinks she sees his reflection in the water. As a result, the maiden doesn't let the pot sink into the water for fear that the reflection of her lover be disturbed. Now, another theme besides love is the terror of the mother-in-law. A lot of women can identify with this. In India, particularly in traditional societies, this is very true. The terror of the mother-in-law and the scarcity of water in the Vagar region is reflected in the following song. And this is a young woman crying out to her grandfather, appealing to her grandfather. Oh, grandfather, kindly do not give your daughters like me in marriage to somebody in the Vagar region. The quarrelsome mother-in-law of Vagar is difficult to deal with. Oh, grandfather, she makes me grind corn during the day and spin during the night. sends me to fetch water late at night, prior to the break of dawn, O grandfather. The pitcher sinks not, since the rope doesn't reach the water. My sun has arisen and set on the bank of the well. O flying birds, take my message to my grandfather that your granddaughter has fallen into the well, O grandfather. Now you understand the theme here is that in despair, she commits suicide. And when I started working on the stepwells, I suddenly realized that so many women in Gujarat, in the rural areas, use the wells and the stepwells to commit suicide, to end their lives out of despair or when they see no hope for them. So it's a very poignant, it's a very tragic theme. Another important theme in the stepwells is the theme of sacrifice. Now, all of you are familiar that sacrifice in all societies is considered very important, particularly in the ancient society. And in India, no sacrifice was seen as too great to quench the thirst of the village and to ensure the survival of the people. The sacrifice of human life was regarded as necessary for the well-being of the community and the village. So many folk songs deal with this theme of sacrifice. The best known is from a stepwell called Madhava in Varvan. And I will do both prose and poetry. For 12 long years, we dug a well. The villagers are lamenting that there was no water in the village well. And for 12 years, we dug a well, but could not locate the underground stream of water. Astrologers of fame were summoned who predicted, oh my dear, the sacrifice of our son and his wife. So they called the astrologers because there was not a drop of water in the village well. And the astrologer said that the only way to obtain water was if the young prince in the village and his new bride, they had a newly married couple, would sacrifice their lives for the sake of water. The couple, so the bride and the bridegroom called their families and dressed in their bridal best, in their bridal clothing and jewelry. The couple descended down in the stepwells. They came down to the 5th step, and the water in the well, which was dry earlier, flowed and immersed them up to the neck. As they stepped down further to the 6th and the 7th step, the pagadi, or the headdress, and the chundari of the young woman were found floating on the water. According to this legend, the sacrifice of the young bride and the bridegroom filled the stepwell with water. I'm moving on to about the last section now, which deals with the art and the symbolism and has some of the iconography. So it is really a section. You have a view, if you can see the image on the screen, of the Rani Ki Vav with the art projected on the walls in sculptural carvings, because many of the stepwells were built under the patronage of women and were frequented by women and represented what I call woman space. The iconography also tends to be unique. There seems to be in the stepwell art a preponderance of the worship of earth and other goddesses, whom we call devis, or village deities. Apsaras, celestial maidens, or naikas, beautiful maidens. The 7 mothers, saptamatrikas, the naga, the serpent prince and the princess, nag Kanya and the Naga, and the Navagraha, the 9 planets, the moon, the animals, the birds, both mythical and real. These are the subject matter of the prolific art of the Stepwells. In the Rani Ki Vav that you are seeing on the screen, there are, as I mentioned, it's 1,000 years old. It was totally inundated by the Saraswati River and then restored a few years ago. They found as many as 15 carvings, beautiful carvings of the mother goddess, what we call Shakti. So Shakti is the creatrix of the whole universe. In the Rani Vav, as I said, there are 15 or more images of the Shakti in her many moods and facets. She is shown as the divine mother. She is the yogini practicing austerities and penance. She is the benevolent mother, the gentle, the compassionate, and the powerful, and I'm going to show you, ferocious warrior who fights the buffalo-headed demon and slays him. Now, before I get to the buffalo-headed demon, one of the walls at Rani Ki Vav has these lattice-worked windows, and there are about 20, 25 of them covering an entire wall, the north wall. Look at the intricate designs there. And when I was absolutely stunned by their beauty. Remember, they are 1,000 years old and they are built in stone. And the artistic beauty of these is just absolutely breathtaking. But what I found even more astounding is that this is in Patan, remember, the city of Patan. And Patan is best known for what the saris, the woven saris known as the patolas, which now sell for 80,000, a lakh or more. The designs on the patolas, which are actually made in Patan, are identical and take from the same designs that we find in the stepwells, in the lattice-worked windows. So it was a very thrilling. There is a patola theme there, which is the connection is fascinating. You see another one, geometrical designs, again, the lattice work. Okay, we are moving on to some of the specific images. I hope you can see them. Can you see them clearly? Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We can. Yes, ma'am. Please continue.
All right. So on the left side, and I just want to draw attention to a few of these sculptural images. You see a really beautiful Naika. Of course, she's nude. And you see her standing between 2 pillars, what look like ornamental pillars. If you look very closely at the top of her head, there are 3 owls. Okay? Go down and you will see, if you have good eyes, that around her left leg is coiling around it is a snake, and he is visible, if you can see properly, trying to reach out at her hand, her right hand, in which she holds a fish plate. And between her 2 legs, again, if you look carefully, is a peacock. Okay, so it's what we are seeing here. The owls, of course, reside in the dark inner recesses of the trees. And according to Hindu mythology, they represent, of course, darkness, but they represent wisdom. And the woman is trying to prevent the snake from getting at the fish. She's trying to protect the fish from being eaten up by the snake. So you see scenes of nature, and we'll talk a little bit about that. There in the middle, next to it, is an image of Varaha, who is an incarnation of Vishnu. On top of his left shoulder there's a little tiny image of a female, if you can see it clearly. And she's cuddling, she's nozzling his nose very affectionately. She is the river Ganges. And then beneath his left leg, which is on some kind of pedestal, there is the Naga Kanya and the Naga Prince, the prince and the princess. And I will need. So what are we seeing here then? What we are seeing is that according to Hindu mythology and folk tradition, the Naga and the Naginis, the snake prince and the princess, inhabit the underwater paradise. They dwell in jewel-studded, ornate palaces, and they are seen as the guardians of the riches of the deep sea. The pearls, the shells, the corals, they are thus the protectors of the energies stored in earthly waters. Another thing, because we are dealing with stepwells, we deal with water, the fish appears over and over again in the artwork. Now, certainly one wants to ask ourselves, what's the relevance of the fish? The fish appears frequently as a common motif because the matsya, or the fish, signifies in Hindu philosophy the emergence of life out of the primordial waters from which the universe was created. Another very common motif, and I don't think I brought the image of that here, is the elephant. Why is it that we see so many depictions of elephants in the stepwell art, so many beautiful sculptural images? It is said in Hindu philosophy again that in primordial times, way before human society began, the elephants had wings and they consorted, they kept companionship with the clouds. They possessed mystical powers to attract rain and could bestow long life, earthly happiness, abundance of crops and cattle, and many offsprings. Because of their association with water and the clouds, elephants appear frequently in stepwell art. Another motif, and I don't know if I had this. Oh, I have to. This is one of my favorite ones, so you need to want to look at it carefully. So here is Anika, very beautiful. She is standing in the pose of a dancer, and she is standing again between two pillars. If you start off from the top, you will see that she's leaning against, practically, a tree from which hang ripe mangoes. I know this is the mango season and I'm missing it in India. Anyway, mangoes are also symbolic of fertility, of fecundity, of abundance. So the woman is also a symbol of fertility. She is, and you'll have to believe me because the image won't show this very well. This woman, or the Naika, this beautiful maiden, had just stepped out of her bath, and she comes outside with her still wet hair. You can see she's practically naked. You can see through her sari, which is transparent, the contours of her very sensuous and very sexual body. What she's doing, what the artist is trying to show, is that she's squeezing the water from her hair, because she's just washed her hair. And right below that, you see a swan trying to reach up to the drops or the droplets of water that are falling from her hair, because it is believed in Hindu mythology that swans like pearls. They like to eat pearls, and this is their favorite food. And mistaking the silver droplets of water for pearls, they are trying to reach at that. Now, I I was absolutely baffled and dumbfounded by such beautiful portrayals in art. And this is one only of 700 such depictions. So this is not a good photograph, but let me quickly, because it brings up one of the themes. Here, there is another Naika. She's absolutely standing in a classical dance position, once again leaning against and bending the foliage or the ripe mangoes or whatever fruits from the tree, suggesting her own fertility, suggesting her own fecundity and abundance. She has in her left hand, if you look very carefully, there is a parrot. And the parrot, it is looking up at her. And she is looking down at the parrot with a very fond and serene look. Now, I would argue that this particular image of the woman looking down at the parrot very fondly and the parrot looking up at her with anticipation and love is a scene of Vatsalya love, the love a woman feels for her child. It is tempting then to put forward the hypothesis that as patrons of art, Stepwell architecture, women promoted not just religious, but also secular art. While Hindu deities do appear in stepwells, it is dominated by the presence of devis, of female goddesses. The art and architecture of the stepwells is still predominantly secular. Many of the stepwells contain motifs and representations, as I said, of the fish, of the makar, the crocodile, in other words, tortoise, snakes, all of which are found in stepwells because they are aquatic creatures. They are linked up with water. They are symbolic of water. In addition, the stepwell art depicts naikas, women, and ordinary scenes of daily lives of women, churning butter, holding water pitchers, pouring water, sexual erotic scenes, and so on and so forth. I would like to argue before I finish up this section and then conclude that nature in all its forms, in all its glory, is represented in the stepwell art, which is characterized by energy, a pulsating vitality, a throbbing, pulsating force. The purpose of art, however, was never to replicate nature, merely imitate nature, but rather it was meant to convey the spiritual essence that is inherent in the world of nature. The personification of nature, the tendency to endow it with human qualities, is a unique and distinctive aspect of Indian art. Water is equated with life itself. Rivers are personified as feminine or goddesses. Trees, plants, creepers, and foliage are believed to possess tenderness and compassion. Plants, animals, and birds mirror human emotions. Okay, and I'm finally wanting to finish up. So the world of nature with birds and animals and humans carved on the walls and pillars still can astonish us. After 1,000 years, they astonish us with their beauty. It is a reminder of a time and a unique worldview in which birds and animals were our companions and equals in the spirit world, a world in which anything was possible, one in which mystical transformations took place between humans, animals, and the divine world. These beautiful stepwells that represent the finest examples of water architecture ceased to be built after the establishment of British rule in the 19th century. The British administration viewed the stepwells with horror and disdain. They regarded the waters in these wells as unclean and unhygienic and a source of potentially hazardous infections. Therefore, regulations imposed by the British prohibited the use of stepwells for drinking water. And after nearly 1,000 years, the stepwell became obsolete and were replaced by taps, pumps, and tube wells. Many of the stepwells were sealed off and declared off limits, while others crumbled to the ground, victims of neglect and disuse. Those that survived are silent reminders of the past, when they came alive with the sound of the women's laughter and the voices of women who came here to fetch water. Now, something very interesting has happened. Though the stepwells are no longer used for water, during my numerous visit, I was struck by the fact that some of these wells are once again being reclaimed by the women and have been transformed into embryonic shrines for the worship of local goddesses now. Women are once again reclaiming their space at the stepwells and these structures as a unique space for the performance of rituals and worship centered even today on fertility, abundance, health, and prosperity. Let me show you women. Okay. These are some very beautiful images if we had time. This is the Mahishasur Mardini, the Devi slaying the buffalo-headed demon. Okay, this is what the wells often now look like. They are not being used at all. They are dirty. But this is the reclaiming. Women have reclaimed these stepwells and appropriated them for their own ritual purposes. Often they can't get the water from the stepwells for water purposes, drinking purposes, but they build a little shrine next to the stepwell, adjacent to the stepwell, with a sort of a somewhat crude image of a goddess, a sculptural representation or an image of the local goddess. And the goddess, as you can see, is dressed in silk and satin. She has gold and tinsel on her bodies and her clothing, and she's often accompanied by her vahan. So you can see here her mount, and here you have the tiger, and it is a goddess with her sword and her weapons in her arms. Women from the surrounding neighborhoods now start coming to these stepwells to perform ritual, not to gain water, not to obtain water, but to perform rituals and for fertility and pray for the best blessings of sons, long life, and prosperity. These often gaudy images of the Devis become a magnet which attracts the local women who converge here, just as women did when they went to fetch water at the stepwells. The goddesses are given offerings of marigolds, flowers, silk scarves, coconuts, fruits, money, and the young girls come from the villages to invoke her blessings, to ensure that they will find good husbands, and to pray for their own fertility and the hope for sons. During a recent visit to one of the stepwells on the outskirts of Ahmedabad, I noticed a mound of clay pots thrown away in the corner of the stepwell. So here in this image, you see that. I was intrigued by what was happening with these old clay pots. And then I discovered that they had been discarded. These clay pots had been discarded after the completion of rituals, where women came, young girls came, performed puja to ask the goddess for the blessings of children or a good husband or happiness or so on and so forth. What is unique about this is that it is the women who are once again preserving these stepwells, not by going to fetch water, but they are making it into their own space to worship the goddess. Some stepwells neglected, crumbling, and dangerous, teem with all forms of life, plants, creepers, which grow defiantly from the crevices of the stone structures. Today you see cooing pigeons and flying bats, which shatter the silence with the arrival of an uninvited stranger. In their midst, parrots the color of spring green share the space, today with snakes, squirrels, frogs, fish, and turtles. In the waters, the dirty waters of the stepwell. The birds and other carved creatures on the walls are now being replaced by these new inhabitants of the stepwells. Now, one can lament the fact that since 19th century, the stepwells are not being used. But there is still hope because women are going to them. And the other thing is that a few years ago, I went to a concert to celebrate the World Heritage Day, which was celebrated recently. And at Adalaj, at the stepwell, this concert was organized, which consisted of a man bhatt, an oral historian or a traditional bardic poet, performing alongside with young people playing the electric guitar and tabla, which was performed by a maestro. Nearly 1,000 people, old and new, gathered at this Adalat stepwell on a cold and starry night to celebrate their architectural heritage and enjoy the fusion music and the rhythms and melodies. As I sat there, I told myself, you can't really grieve over what has been lost, but the new generation of youth are now rediscovering ancient buildings like the Adalat stepwell, and in the process, learning and rediscovering the legacy of their past. Queen Rudabai, again a woman who commissioned this stepwell at Adalaj, had an inscription placed there which says, "As long as the sun and the moon shine, may there be joy and steadfastness." And I think this festival of music persuaded me that Rudabai, had she come back to life, would have looked at these 1,000 people at a Dalit stepwell commissioned by her, and she would have smiled and been happy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. This was not only like an academic lecture or something like that, but it was more poetic, I must say.
Yeah, thank
It
you very
touched
much.
all the realms, celestial, the earthly, and everything. And ma'am, if you want, you can go to you can check some Q&A from the audience we have.
Yes, I would be very happy. I'm trying to see if I can get to the chat room here, or will you? Let me see. Uh,
Yes, the first question is from Suparna. She's saying, I remember watching a Gujarati movie called Helado. It shows how the process of fetching water led the women of the village to freedom from the patriarchal bonds. Would you like to comment on that?
Okay, I'll do so briefly. I've sort of already touched upon some of it. You know, you people are young and you people belong to a new generation, as I actually enjoyed my freedoms. But in rural areas, in traditional Indian society, women really are bound down to the home. And that's why I talk about the domestic, where they're stuck behind four walls in their home, cooking, cleaning, children, elderly care. And they seldom can go out and really enjoy the freedom of other girlfriends, networking. I've always told my students, women will rise to power when they begin to network the way men do, who have always gone out into the public realm. So I think it's very important. I didn't see that film, but I think it's very important that women have some place where they can go and hang out with other women. In my older years, I'm beginning to enjoy the great thrill of going out, having dinner, going out to places with other women. There's a different kind of pleasure there. You laugh, you cry, you share certain confidences, and this is what the women were doing. Even if, and of course, it is true, they're escaping the constraints and the restraints and the patriarchy and of a joint family in which they are the lowest and the most subordinate. So to me, this is the most exciting thing, that women find a way to hang out with other women, to share what they want. Where else can a young married woman, newly married woman, complain about her husband or a mother-in-law, or particularly if she has encountered a stranger, and in her mind at least she is infatuated? This is where she could give vent to her innermost feelings, her lived experiences. I don't know if Suparna, if that answers the question.
Thank you, ma'am. We have some comments as well. I will show you apart from the good evening comments, and there is like Dahlia is having Russia is saying it's a wonderful presentation. It was indeed a wonderful presentation.
Thank
The
you.
images are
Thank you very much.
very,
I do, as as Aratrika knows, and probably Suparna too, I'm not very used to remote kind of technology, because I really want to see my audience in person. But I'm happy to share this because it is a subject close to my heart. I've written 5 other books. This is the book that captures my heart more than anything, because what it does, and I have to apologize to the men folk there, but I hope they're enlightened enough to see this point, that what it does is bring together really women's lives, their lived experiences, water, which is so central to survival, art, and architecture. So in some ways, it truly allowed me, and I'm a historian by training, but it allowed me to break free of the bounds of any one discipline and to do what I wanted. I wanted the poems. I wanted to speak with their voice, not to impose a scholar's voice or a researcher's voice on them. And I have to say that it was also the project that was the most fun. I mean, it didn't seem like working on a book. It seemed like doing what I was always cut out to do, and I've lived 52 years in the States, so I've never lived actually in Gujarat. I grew up in Delhi and then left for United States to do my graduate work. It gave me an opportunity to return back to my roots, to try to research something that is a part of my legacy, my cultural legacy that I have inherited. And I'm hoping that my lecture can, in a small way, convey to all of you, because you are the future generation of scholars and researchers, that this is not work, this is a passion. And when it is a passion, it takes you to places you never thought you could ever go. Thank you.
and it gives you an identity as well. Like it gives voice to the people who are whose voice we cannot hear. You give them voices. At the
And
same time, it gives you an identity as well.
absolutely. No, and that's very important. I think scholarship all over the world has focused on the elites to a great extent. We have histories of kings and rulers and princes and royal families. I'm more interested now in saying, let's unfurl, let's reveal, let's find out what the lives of ordinary people are. I mean, in a country with 1.4 billion people, why is it that we don't have more translations of folklore? Now, I'm saying this because part of my hope is, this is the teacher in me, but the part of my hope is that one or two of you will someday go out and record the songs the stories from your grandparents, from your grandmother, from the society, once they are lost in the modern world, they'll be gone forever. And record them, and then you can transcribe them, you can put them down in writing. This is really, to me, living history. It's not about a past 1,000 years ago of battles and kings. It is your history and my history and other people. I don't mean to exclude men. I think there's much. I just haven't done too much of that, though my last book really does deal with men as much as women. But to me, it's very exciting to work on women's lives.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
Karen, yes, ma'am, you were saying something?
No, I was just saying if men have any questions or want to bombard me with some criticism, I'm too far away for you to do anything to me. No,
No,
I
actually, men have some interesting comments only. But first, we are taking Karen. She's in an eye-opening perspective for us Americans. Thank you. Then we have Shubhodip sir, who is saying very insightful study. Thank you, ma'am. Then we have Shoikot Raha. Thank you so much for offering such a moving insight into a specific culture. And also, as I was saying, is actually echoing my thoughts only. It offers a factual ethnographic study and a poetic unraveling of cultural beliefs. It's true, it's poetry. The way you said everything, the way you present it.
Thank you.
So
Thank you. I
smooth
wish
and
I wish I
presentable.
was back in the classroom, because you make me feel sad about giving up teaching. Once in a while I do a lot of lectures, that the most thrilling is always to have a younger scholars there, because I can reach out to them and hopefully they will do wonderful work, as in the years to come. So I'm very, very, very happy. And this is not goodbye, because I'm going to come to Calcutta one of these days. I can't wait for
Okay. We can't wait to meet you then.
I was there 65 years ago, so I haven't
Oh
been
my God.
I haven't been back to Calcutta, but a lot of wonderful literature and culture has grown out of that. So, and I hope that when I'm in Ahmedabad, and I'm there a lot outside of the COVID stage, that you will come visit me there. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am. Would love to meet you once in Kolkata only.
Thank you.
And personally, ma'am, I have a question the stepwells of Gujarat or maybe in other parts of India. Can you suggest some pieces of literature, written literature, where we can find the mention of such stepwells, the history and the myth related to it?
Okay, I could be vain, and so you can start with my books, because there is a there's a very boring chapter in that, in which I actually document every one of the step wells that has been studied in Gujarat. But
Okay.
what I will do, Aratrika, is send you a bibliography, if you would like, of
Yes,
all
ma'am.
the materials. So you'll have to sift through and decide whether you want the folklore, the folk literature, and then you
Okay.
can, and that would, instead of, there are a couple books, and I feel very sad about that. Couple very good books. They are coffee table books, but they are written by and published in uh, by American scholars, women scholars, and they're
Okay.
wonderful, and they are in my bibliography too, and they're really wonderful. Mine tends to be more academic. I wasn't reaching I love a coffee table book, but I wasn't trying for that. But I'll send that to you, so you have it for your records, and you can share it with, I have no problem. The literature is very much more difficult, because it's all in different languages. So, I mean, if somebody's from Rajasthan, I think there's research waiting to be done if one knows the language. Okay. But I will send you, mine will have also the Gujarati material. Okay. And continue the conversation with me when you have the time. I'd be happy to help any one of you. And Aritrika, I have to get together with you anyway, um,
Yes,
virtually.
ma'am.
Okay.
We
For
should
your,
be yes, ma'am.
all right. Okay. Take care. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
thank you, ma'am. We don't have any more questions. So thank you, ma'am, so much for joining us today.
Thank
I'll now ask Suparna. She's here to conclude the session and give the official vote of thanks to you.
Okay, thank you. I did one quick question I had. Were
Yes,
the
ma'am.
images visible all right?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Oh, it was perfect. It was
It was
perfect.
perfect.
Okay, thank you very much again. It's a
Thank you,
pleasure.
ma'am. It's really a pleasure to have you with
My
us today.
pleasure.
On behalf of Calcutta Comparatists 1919 and its members, I would like to convey our hearty thanks to Professor Purnima Mehta Bhatt. I would like to thank our participants who join us on YouTube. Thank you all for joining us today. Now we conclude the session. We wish to see you in our next lectures.
Thank you very much. And
Thank
thank you
you,
again
ma'am.
for
And also thanks to Naresh, Dr. Naresh Kumar, sir, for recommending your session. Thank you so much.
yeah, I met
Thank you,
him
ma'am.
only. I have met him only once, but I did a keynote for him, so maybe. But
Okay.
I please thank him also from my side.
Yes, ma'am, surely.
Thank you
Thank
very
you so
much.
much. Good
Thank.
day,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
Good night to all our participants.
All right. Thank you so much.